computer. There we go. All right. So yeah, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you, man. It's been like, when were you in Berkeley? 21 or 22?
It was pre-COVID, wasn't it?
No, it was post-COVID, wasn't it? Oh, maybe it was. No, was it really pre?
I think it was pre.
Okay.
So it might
Okay.
have been 2019. It
Okay.
was the CNS was in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. I do remember we got together in that room at Berkeley Way West with a bunch of
Yeah.
people. So that, okay, so it was pre. Okay. The pre-post, I've lost all track of time. Mess. And
Yeah.
honestly, it was great just to, as I was making a list of, because I'm trying to go for some sort of thematic continuation from these things. And then talking to Blaze last week, I was like, oh, Joe would be perfect, because then we could go back and look at respiration, the mechanical effects of respiration in QC. And I haven't looked at any of this literature for probably 4 or 5 years. So I had to sort of do a quick boot camp and catch back up. It seems like there's been some good progress, but not as much as I would have hoped. Right? That
There's still, yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's also one of those, there's so much literature trying to track it all. I don't keep in as much as I would like sometimes up with everything, but I still just a few days ago or last week or so, somebody was like, oh, I have this data set and is multiband 6. And I was just like, how does it look? And
like you would expect.
people are still surprised, and people don't seem as aware as I would hope that
And the multiband
these
6,
issues.
it's at least AP phase encoding, I hope, or PA, one of those. So they're not at least doing not left, right. We've put that to bed.
No, they're doing PA though,
Yeah,
and
okay.
encoding only. And they're very interested in frontal regions.
Yeah, of course. Right.
So that also, I was like, because just the couple of people I looked at, I immediately was spotting crescent artifacts right through the frontal cortex from the ghosting in their PA images.
And
I
is
mean,
that coming from the occipital lobe? It's ghosting around and aliasing into the frontal lobes, just because the FOV is a bit too tight. Yeah, yeah. So there's a first lesson for people to look at. Yeah, always look and see where your ghosts fall. Right, that's a absolute, especially if the ghosts fall in a region of maximum interest, because now you've got maximum variance. Congratulations.
Exactly.
Congratulations, false positives. Yeah, that's the same issue as with Ravi when we were talking about with the Diana stuff. You position your surface coil and bias everything to look at somatosensory cortex in a rat. Guess where the highest variance is? Where you're looking, right? The drunk man looking for his keys under the lamppost. So yeah, that's a really good point. So where is QC right now? I've watched your video and your paper and then the little symposium you guys did last year.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Right. But what is the state of play in terms of
so
QC?
that project, I'm blanking. Paul Taylor was kind of has been the main driver of that. And at the moment, so Paul went around and went to the OHBM folks, and it is actually going to be kind of a COBIDOS-like paper at some point. And I'm not sure what the current status was, that I've been kind of out of the loop with it a bit. But a few months ago, there were a series of Zoom meetings with a bunch of the authors that were part of the OpenQC project. And there's some Google Docs and things that Paul has went through and collated kind of if you put everybody's teams and everybody's pipelines together, are there any kind of common things, kind of as a minimal set versus a good to do set? And also, I mean, because one of the things we touched about a lot was just the terminology, that some of the QC efforts are really harmed by or slowed down by everybody using different terms. And I even just did it when I was saying crescents, and that what people mean by TSNR images and these sorts of things vary drastically.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it isn't very easy to quantify.
Yeah.
So that's one of the goals for the OHBM group, paper that will eventually come out, or document, will be to kind of have here's a set of terms, at least, that have a definition. So you can at least kind of describe what you did in your case.
That's good. Yeah, that's important, right? Obviously, you need a vocabulary. So that sounds like a sort of a stock take. So it's like where we are. Let's collate the state of the current art, and document it. Get people having a similar language, and then maybe hopefully start to perhaps even have working groups on specific problems, just focus to try to drive things forward rather than wait for people to have inspiration randomly.
Yeah, and I don't know of any efforts along those lines. It would be a good thing. I totally agree. And like for the OpenQC project, we purposely restricted it to single band imaging. And that was partly just because to keep it manageable, we had to have some limits on it.
Well, that suggests though immediately you could do it again next year with multiband. Just replay the whole shebang, right?
And there would, of course, for some of the echo I don't know if there's enough multi.
I wouldn't go that far yet, because yeah, probably not enough people getting into that. But one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
But at the rate at which things are progressing, it's sort of seems to be sort of 5 years before maybe some sort of incremental goal again.
Yeah.
Then doing multiband next year would be pretty good timing, I would have thought. Maybe in 3 or 4 years' time you can do multi-echo when we figure it all out.
Yeah, as far as I know, we're not, I haven't heard of any such efforts, but I agree that it would be good. I don't know that anybody has the bandwidth, at least of Paul and us from this go round, but
right. But that's one of the goals of these sorts of chats, is like to document stuff that you don't normally hear anywhere else, except when you're bitching about stuff at conferences. Same problems. And like, well, anyone thought of changing what you're doing? But hopefully someone will take motivation from hearing this. And there are people maybe like Paul, but other people who are, Satra Ghosh comes to mind. There are people who take this stuff on as they champion this stuff as their science, right? So so somebody will find, hey, this is an opportunity here. I can build grant proposals out of this. I can get money for this.
I think
it has to be the right person.
There's definitely room.
Yeah, right. Okay, well that's cool. Well, I'll try and foster that a little bit. I mean, I'm a couple of degrees away from this because I'm not even doing fMRI myself, right? I'm supporting people doing it. I just need to make sure that they don't screw up the acquisition to the point, like you were saying, where they, they're trying to process it in 3 years, and it's like, sorry, dude, that ship has sailed. You've got these problems baked in now.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. Well, So you tell me what else you'd like to talk about. Any other sort of QC type things you're involved in, or anything that you want to get off your chest to jivvy the community up a little bit?
Well, you did prep me for that one. One of them is, one of the standard ones, but it was just, I was alluding to this person with the MB6 data set. And there seem to be kind of two schools of thought about how you should conduct studies. And I'm talking now about kind of the bigger, like you're going to have fMRI data from 100 people or something. So, it's a multi-year, perhaps multi-months at least. The data isn't coming in like an MTurk study or some sort of online thing where the entire data set's collected in 2 days. That takes a different sort of management than something like fMRI or physio data that's collected kind of a day at a time sort of thing.
As the right people with the right characteristics become available and actually manage to show up, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and it just takes a long time for each participant and stuff. The sessions are longer. But anyway, for those, I've run into a couple of data sets lately where, one of them, they were collecting a bunch of physio data and nobody had looked at the data because they didn't want to be peeking. And then it turns out that a third or so of the participants don't have any trigger codes in the data streams at all. And so
TTLs from the scanner?
No, this is physio outside. So BioPack.
The trigger codes being the synchrony between the And how is that being done? Is that with a TTL? Are they recording the TTL out, the pulse
No,
out? from the
well,
scanner?
how it's supposed to work is that the BioPack hardware sends a signal in and it's registered and acknowledged along with the EKG and heart rate. And
So they're driving from BioPack out. So it's an output signal from BioPack being recorded elsewhere. Okay, right.
Yeah, and some of it sometimes, actually, I'm not sure this particular one I was kind of adjacent to and trying to help troubleshoot. But yeah, it definitely, it should have shown up, and in 2/3 of the people, the triggers did show up in the acknowledge, in a couple of channels in the acknowledge files.
So
But
does that mean something wasn't being toggled on and off, right? So that's a checklist failure, right? So essentially, you fire it all up, you double check engine running, wings
But
on.
that's the kind, or maybe a cable broke or an amplifier
Sure,
broke.
but
Who
a
knows?
basic checklist at scan start prep before the subject even gets there tells you that the scanner that everything is where it needs to be, right? So that's a
Or if,
procedural failure.
or yeah, I mean, and that, yeah, having good quality control checklists and SOPs, that
Right,
kind of
exactly.
thing can help. But it also, if you had been doing whereas to get back to the QC, where if immediately after data collection, they had done a bit of minimal pre-processing, to use the fMRI term, though in this case, like I said, it's physio data. But we have, for one of the studies that have been involved with, that's doing old school psychophys. It's back to my roots, but so it's like after the participant leaves, there's a step of procedures that the research assistants and technicians that collected the data, they get the data from acknowledge into CSV. We get it into CSVs, and the code looks for which channels should be there and shows bits of the channel to the RA saying, is this an EKG channel? Yes, no,
right.
and then saves it as a CSV with the labeled channels. And then, so it's like my code does its best guess, but the human checks. And then it actually writes out, then we do it with R, but a knitter file, a PDF with the traces. So, and this is all done, it's for the RA running it, it's a few clicks, but it produces this PDF that says, did it find the number of triggers it should have given this task design? Did it find, and it just lists, and if it doesn't find something, it, flags it. So if for this study I was referring to, those collected some years ago, if they had been doing that sort of procedure, they conceivably could have caught, within a day, that they weren't getting triggers anymore. And then have been investigating, why aren't we getting triggers? Is it because of this, because of that? They could have investigated and hopefully only lost triggers on a person or two, as opposed to a third of the data set.
And yeah, you could have had an easy traffic, presumably your system, simple traffic light, green, yellow, look, if it's all greens, okie dokie, everything is within dynamic range, etc. expectations. Even if you didn't look at it, you would still be pretty confident with experience that it's checking what you expect to see. Once you've done it 1,000 times and it's always correct, you can probably do it blindly. But yeah, well, that's sad. That's very sad. And did they lose the physiology as well, or just the trigger? So they've just got a synchrony problem.
Just the triggers, and the nature of this particular task had variable intervals. So there's really no way to reconstruct, those people. The data is just not going to be useful.
But isn't it just a case you've got two waveforms? You've got an fMRI waveform and you've got physio waveforms. The physio waveforms are all synchronized. There's a bunch of.
Well, yeah, but this one is only physio. This was outside.
It's all pure physio.
This is the psychophys. So there's no.
Can they do it? So can they do a data? Is there no clever way you could try to find some kind of major events in any of these data to find where it would associate with something else, like major
in this particular case, I don't think so. And I've been very pleased. We have a new programmer who's been around a year now, getting up to speed, and she was taking the lead on debugging this, and I was kind of sticking my head in to help out now and then. But with the design of the task, it doesn't seem to, because they had to like do some paper and pencil stuff. Then after a while, they had to do this and had to do
So
that.
there are
So
variable delays between the blocks, and so yeah, there is no. You'd have to do the resynchronize every time you restart. Holy cow! Okay, that's tough.
yeah, and also just the way the RA who starts the participant then had to walk around to start the physio recording, so we can't even go off of how much time it was from exactly with the start of the recording, because that's even variable.
That's a painful lesson. Well, the people involved will have learned. They will
Yeah.
never ever make that mistake again. It's like people who lose 6 months of data because they didn't archive. You know, you then fail to archive once in your life and never ever again. Sad. Very
Yeah,
true.
but though sometimes even with this kind of stuff, I wonder if, I don't know about this particular case, but I've worked with some folks where the lesson they take seems to be, oh, I need better personnel, as opposed to I need better procedures.
Mhm.
And to be looking at the data, and by looking at, I do mean this, do we have the channels
Right.
that we're
Yeah.
supposed to? I don't mean testing the
Yeah,
hypotheses of
exactly. You're not
interest.
fishing. You're not harking. You're doing a sanity check, just like you would, like when you move data around, right? Does the file size make sense? Does the date stuff make
Exactly.
sense, right?
If there
So,
were 10 trials, do we have 10 triggers, or
yeah.
this
Does the
kind
file
of,
size make sense for the amount of data? Did something go right? Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, these are
And
all, and
do
these
you
should
see
all be items
grades?
on a
And
checklist. Absolutely.
yeah,
We'll just go down. Tuk, 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 tuk. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. So related to that, funnily enough, something else that we can, just to keep on top of mind for everybody, the new, at least new to me, Prisma trigger box, the output box from the Siemens, the little silver box, now has the toggle on the outside, so you can do pulsed TTLs, or you can do high-low switching at the convenience of a nice toggle switch conveniently left on the outside of the box where it can be banged into by anybody doing anything, dusting, whatever, reaching over. It used to be a jumper inside the box. So there's no way you could possibly screw that up, right? Without really, really intending to. But now, no, you can just jog it. So I've taped mine, I put a sign on it, toggle up, right? And I
yeah,
then put a little plastic cover over it, like it's the quench button for the magnet. So
right,
you don't
right.
inadvertently clock it with
Well,
your
it is
memory.
that important, at least
Yes,
for
it
those
is.
of
And
us
the
doing
reason why,
tasks.
yep, and an institution that shall remain nameless contacted me a year or two ago with exactly this problem before I'd even had a Prisma, so I didn't know what they were talking about, but we thought about it for a while. They had a varying, I don't know how much data, it was a lot, months or maybe even years, during the pandemic, probably where nobody was keeping an eye on the system like they would have been normally.
Yeah,
And it had managed to fall into the high-low flip-flop state. So their scripts obviously were running fine. So it was obviously triggering off a rising or a falling edge, and that was happy.
yeah,
But they had a 1 TR ambiguity. They weren't quite sure, should we be, this TR or this TR? What's the start point? Because he could be 1 TR out. And what we figured out was that you could actually use the fMRI data to figure that out, because with something simple like an HRF from a finger tapping or visual, as
yeah,
long as you get a 4 to 6 second peak makes biological sense. A 6 to 8, not so much, and a 2 to
yeah.
4, not at all, right? So they were able to figure it out, and like, okay, this was the state
Reverse
during these
engineer.
times.
Yeah.
You sort of extract it out of the data, so then they were able to recover and move on. But still, a very painful lesson for them. I bet you they were very scared.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not recoverable.
Correct. No,
And
that's exactly. In that case, it was
yeah,
after some
in that
hard
case it
thinking.
was, but
But
it
yeah,
also makes you wonder, so how many, if they had, how were studies being completed before anybody realized this ambiguity and using all the wrong
yeah.
triggers?
Yeah. So again, it would have been harder if in our case with physio, we do the other way. We take the signal from Siemens, which is very short. We extend it in a box to, I think it's 60 milliseconds, so that we can easily see a nice square waveform with a 100, 200 hertz sampling,
Yeah,
which is plenty for physio monitoring for the kind that we do. And then we feed that into BioPack. So we have a separate trace for TTLs, respiration trace, pulse ox, old known in pulse oximeters that give you the actual output of the
Yeah,
SiO2.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can do if you are at all concerned, you can look at that. Of course, you can always just look for, well, looking for 5s on keyboards is not as good, because if it's just going high low, you would get a 5 whether it's going high or going low, so that wouldn't necessarily tell you much. But seeing the square waveform rather than high low would be a you know,
Yeah.
a bulletproof. Well, golly, okay. So yes, more QC people, more checklists. I mean, I don't think I have checklists included in my user training guide, and I don't think anybody even takes them as starting points. Even my guys, they just
Yeah. Well, it's
Right.
hard. I mean, it's hard, isn't it, to, kind of, first of all, to get good checklists
you have
takes,
to make them yourself. But I'm
and
lazy. That's why I use them, because I'm lazy.
yeah. No, but I mean, to kind of have the key points on there, sometimes you have to sort of have the pain before you're like, oh, we have to make sure to include this,
Mhm,
on this
mhm,
went wrong, therefore we
mhm.
need to update. But for these sorts of big part studies, especially if you're having multiple people collect the data and interact with the participants, or interact, it just, you have to try to keep any sort of continuity.
Yeah,
But
certainly in the multi-center trials that I've been involved in, those all have checklists. They're relatively rudimentary. I mean, they might be at the scan level, T1 check, yes, no.
yeah,
Incidental findings, yes, no. That's about, and there's no responsibility on the part of the scanner operator. It's just a useful thing to check it, because when it gets to the reading center, the ones that have a yes potential check will get flagged first, and they go to the radiographer, the radiologist first. So yeah.
but if, as we're talking about this kind of, worst case scenario things and testing, but I did want to bring out that it's not, I'm not saying look at your data only because, it is kind of we want to avoid catastrophes, but it's also, I think, good practice to understand what you're looking at. And I've run into a lot of folks, especially on the fMRI side of things, with, with the physio, old school psychophys, the data rates are so much smaller. And like with EEG, even, I've been starting to work with some EEG folks. I don't know enough about that to really be useful myself, but they do seem to be a little bit closer to the waveforms and actually viewing the waveforms as the data is coming in and during the processing. But with fMRI, there seems to be a tendency, at least in some groups, to, I'll ask, somebody will be, oh, I'm not sure what's going on here. And I'll, come up, try to see. And it's like, I'm like, well, how does it look? Do you see brains when you look at the raw images? And they just look at me blankly. They don't know how to look at DICOMs. And I'm like, I'm not talking about, let's look heavy duty into the nitty gritty of the headers. I'm talking about, if you open it in Mango, do you see brains? Or your favorite, we have Mango installed on the, Mango's kind of our lab standard for that kind of thing. And it just kind of blows their mind that, oh, I can look at the raw data. And I was like, yeah, and see, if you go through the functional run, you see how you can see the blood going in the veins and that.
Yeah, well, and on that note, I mean, I try to train everybody to keep the inline display open throughout their scan. Watch the damn thing, because then if you're not looking at the person's feet, then you might notice that, hey, they're fidgeting because the brain's moving. And then you look in the scanner room and you're like, oh, hello, this person's uncomfortable, right? You can monitor that stuff real time if you want to.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, but even though, yeah, I mean, sometimes people are, especially if it's a complicated task design or whatever, the RAs might be reading instructions and checking response rates and all of this during the scan. But, regardless, because yes, obviously checking it during, and we have firm set up on some of the machines, so that we're not doing resting state. It's not as useful, we never like extend a scan or anything, but it's still useful to give the folks running the scan an extra heads up to
more real-time QA than
and we've also, with a fair number of studies, used the eye tracker camera. to point it. You know, we're not actually eye tracking, but they
Well,
point the camera at the person just to see their eyes. You
mhm.
know,
That's good.
are
Yeah,
their eyes
like a
open?
ball camera. You're right. That makes perfect sense. I wonder then if in the bigger picture, the EEG folks, maybe they expect problems, whereas fMRI folks tend to expect success. Because the EEG, you know, there's always an electrode or two that don't work. Something gets dry, you know, right?
Yeah,
That's common, right? So they know they're going to have to go around and cycle and put gel in and all that jazz, right? So maybe the fact that it's automatically, they know something's going to go wrong. It always does, right?
maybe,
That predisposes them to look for other problems. Whereas the fMRI crowd, maybe that it's so easy to put somebody in, connect the coil, and they've made it even easier on the Prisma. It's just the trivial work, the clinical workflow is so smooth.
yeah.
But that comes with a cost that you may be screwing up and not realize it.
Yeah, and maybe some of it too with the MRI, it's like okay, I have to remember no metal, nothing in my pocket. I could kill the participant if I carry a hammer. I mean, obviously, nobody better be bringing hammers anywhere near. But, you know, you do have that kind of fear with the fMRI that maybe you don't, of sort of I can't touch it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's a philosophical thing. We prided ourselves on training everybody. You know, young scientists come here and they learn how to scan. There's no alternative. We don't have text to run the scanner for them. So it's like, you know, don't come here for 3 months and expect to walk out an expert. You know, you might, after a couple of years, you might have graced the surface.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think that's important. If we're going to train scientists who then are going to have successful careers, to be able to teach this when they're in charge of scanning centers. If they've never been on the coal face, how can they know what coal mining is like?
Yeah.
So, all right, well, that's cool. So go back to firm. I did read Damien Fair's paper from 2019 or 2020 with the inline filtering. That was quite interesting for pseudo-motion. So I guess he was working sort of right at the same time as just after we were, and then right at the same time as Jonathan Power's paper.
Yeah, with trying to isolate the respiratory bands.
Right. And do you use that notch filter? Is there like a
sometimes, but yes, but I have not played around with so as a short answer, the projects that I'm on now, they do turn that on during the scanning to do the kind of real-time monitoring thing of just, is firm saying it's horrible or not?
And is it like an FD number that comes up?
I'm trying to remember the number. They tend to report like percentages and things like this of whatever the little display. You can tell I haven't run it myself. But I've seen it, but the display says some sort of percentages. And if the percentages are getting high with this, then that, you know, they need to kind of check in with the participant and see if they need a break, and, you know, as you said, the comfort and stuff. But in our cases, some of it, the firm is still, you know, it'll be saying, oh, this run is really bad according to firm, and I look at it and I'm like, nah, we'll be fine. You know, it's kind of too many false alarms almost.
Is that the FD issue that the setting of like encode something that's picking up too much pseudo motion?
Exactly. Yeah, I think so.
Because that's a trait, right? So it's going to be a pretty good stable trait for an individual. I understand.
The respiration rate. Well, it's the breathing
and the size of the fluctuations, because it's sort
right.
of
That is
size of your chest cavity, basically.
Yeah, that is very stable. Yeah. When we've looked at that in the multi-centered, the multi-visit, you know, session designs and stuff, it's pretty dang stable.
Yeah. So that's also super important for people to take home, right? Because that's a group level, or even within subjects confound, you know, could be. I know I've seen, you know, weight loss studies, you know, people who had weight issues, now they're slimmer. Well, okay, there's a systematic difference right there. Right. I mean,
well,
what happens?
Yeah, though even within, so in one of the studies that we're doing now, there's a lot of fMRI, and so we have a built-in break for the people to get out of the scanner and stretch their legs a bit and stuff before finishing up the session. And so they are getting out. And with this study, so, you know, they're not losing substantial weight in the, 15-minute break.
No,
Um,
no.
But sometimes the head position, though, their apparent motion will be noticeably different between the first and second half.
Yeah.
And
Easy
even though,
could be the head position, it could easily be the body position, because the angle of your torso on the table is very, I know some people are in like sideways, and
yeah, or they might decide they need an extra pillow or,
Yeah.
something else under their knees or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. That's a
But
good point.
it doesn't ever really, I mean, this is just me anecdotally, it'd be cool for somebody sometime to really, do it a bit more systematically, investigation, but I don't notice people going from like really high apparent motion to none or just the barest of wiggle. But going from high to medium to high, that kind of stuff definitely seems to happen across breaks or sessions.
Makes sense.
If we have like the same people coming different days type of
that
designs.
Makes perfect sense. So yeah, it's a stable trait, but traits can be modulated by position.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you ever figure out your problem from last year about setting FD to reject?
Yeah, and that was an interesting, so this is that study's still ongoing. That's actually the traces that I was showing there are so this is referring to a blog post from my backlog of blog posts is really horrible.
And I'm going to put them all down in the show notes too. There'll all be stuff down in the link.
Yeah, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is one where it's this study where we have the built-in break because it's so much fMRI. I don't know how people can do it that long. I'm so impressed by the participants that have like 90 whatever % response rate over 4 hours. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. But it's not supposed to take 4 hours, but sometimes anyway. But this study, it's a multiband 4 study with 3 millimeter isotropic, so fairly big voxels. But I've been pleased by the clarity of the time courses and the responses we're getting. It's looking pretty
fast
good.
TR? Are you doing short TR with this?
1 second.
1 second, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And it's looking pretty good because this study, they're interested in subcortical a fair bit. And I was like, we cannot go too small and have a chance here. But the apparent motion, the breathing, we can get 1 millimeter easily in some participants, like that one I posted, where in extreme cases, the FD will be above 0.9 on every single breath. And, that's clearly not something in my mind that we want to censor out or drop the run. We'll get some where from straight breathing, and the oscillations will be perfectly flat. But,
Well, now you brought that up, let me show this. So because I went looking for, none of my ideas are ever original. So there's always at least a bunch of literature. And sure enough, Jonathan Power, let's see, let me do a share quickly.
Yeah, they've done some stuff with filtering and different, and
he also looked at this was his 2014 paper,
right?
He did the big investigation, and yeah, here we go. So right here, I'm going to zoom in on it. So dashed line is the translational displacement going into FD, and there's the rotation. It's super hard to see because it's dots and dashes all mixed up together.
Yeah.
But there are definitely periods where, for example, this guy here, where the translation is super high on the flanks, and underneath there's just one little tiny spike in the rotation. So that's probably the real motion right there, and pseudo motion either side being aliased because this is a slow TR. And there are other, here's a disconnect too, another one. Translation high, real pseudo motion, or sorry, translation, so probably pseudo motion high, respiration, but real motion low because the little dot is way down.
Because they're not moving their head, actually.
Yeah, right. So
and I saw your comment about that, and I flagged that also in my notes for something to investigate.
Should be pretty trivial to change the FD calculation.
Oh, absolutely. It's more just to you know, the validation and what's this gonna, you know,
Yeah,
is it
it's
doing
that
something?
crosstalk, right? When it's the ambiguities, right? It's always on the edges, right? But you know, in your case, you're just trying to set a threshold for making a decision. If you can make it just a less complicated decision, right, then you know
That would
you're
be,
ahead,
yeah,
right?
because we've kind of handled it by having a very high FD threshold for censoring compared to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we could have a less sensitive, yeah,
Cool.
you omitting those
Yeah, that's cool.
translations might be even more workable for.
There's one. Let me just chew this, just so, and I put all these papers down in the bottom too when I post this. This paper, this is power in what year was this one?
Yeah, that's one of the, yeah, that's around the same time. I think we're
2019.
more
Okay.
recent. Yeah.
Yeah, this was right after you and I were blogging about this stuff. But he did leave X out, which was the phase encode direction from the translation in his calculation of FD in one of these figures. I find these figures quite difficult to interpret. There's an awful lot going on. Let's see, where is the one I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right here. So look at the key, effective sum pseudo-motion filter, taking out X, where X in this case is the
Translation,
phase
the
encode
encoding
direction. So
yeah.
if you just, you know, I don't know that for sure that this, I'm interpreting this correctly, but it looks like the black traces are the original, and then the red traces are after taking that filtering out or leaving out in the frame-wise displacement calculation, just that translation. So it's sort of a one of the axes. I was thinking take all three of the translations out. Just
yeah. Well, and with our AP encoding, it would have to be the Y and probably Z.
Yeah.
And most participants, it's strongest in Y, next strongest in Z, not much in X, but it kind of varies a bit with.
Yeah. Don't quote me, but I think this was HCP data, early HCP data. So I think this is multiband 8 left-right phase encoding.
Yeah, which is painful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There we go. Even the experts make mistakes.
Yeah. No, and this is the kind of thing that, well, for me, I'd be plotting the 6. I really like looking at the 6, all 6, and then the FD to see, you know, if the regular FD with all 3 translations and rotations versus an FD with omitting the Y at least translation.
Right. Yeah.
You know, just visually, does it appear to track the actual head motions better as opposed to the breathing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was thinking about, like having a working group to at least, you know, let's at least look at the practices today. Maybe we can do better without changing really very much at all. Maybe we've just baked in too many things into sort of the tools. We just need to use our intuition a little bit to make slightly better tools to make slightly better decisions, even if we can't fix it right now. So that's cool. I did see a paper, which I'll also put down. Blaze mentioned last week when I talked to him, he was asking, hey, what can I do with phase images? There's a new paper came out of UBC, you know, it's British Columbia, it's Alex Rausch's group, where he's using phase images, and they're actually, so you're doing your regular, he did multiband 3, I think it was, and you're doing your regular EPI, but he's collecting the phase images as well as the magnitude images. Then they manage to, they do some sort of spherical deconvolution and take out the field, and the 0th order term is that 1 to 3 hertz shift, which is giving the pseudo motion. So they're able to basically, you know, sort of extract that out of the phase map. Well, that would give you independent information on what's happening. You could either try to apply a correction to the images, which is I think what he did, and then you have your corrected time series, go back and reconstruct and have hopefully magnitude images that are now not moving because you've got the complex data. I assume, although maybe that's not possible. But anyway, you can always figure out what the translation would need to be on an individual frame basis. If you know that it's a +2 hertz shift, okay, I've got to move this volume needs to come back down this much. Boom, and then you have a principle, then you move on to the next volume and so on. So you would at least have a non-referenced or self-referenced way of fixing the problem at source, which would be phenomenal. It would mean that we'd need to shift to collecting the phase images as well. I might start just having people do that just in case we can start testing this. Because if we fix this, then everyone's going to want to collect phase images.
Yeah. Though I wonder, because that's aimed at apparent motion or
Yeah,
like,
just the apparent motion. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
it's only like a 1 to 3 hertz shift. It's just a zeroth order term. It's referenceless. So rather than doing like markers and trying to measure field probes and things, they just literally look at the phase and say, well, okay, you've got local phase and then you've got global phase. The global phase is just going up and down with a zeroth order term because it's so long spatially. We should be able to pull that out. So they do some sort of spherical deconvolution, find the zeroth order term and go, right, we'll call that the pseudo-motion, and it's right at the right magnitude, only 1 to 3 hertz. And then, well, let's apply a correction, and voila.
So do they apply that slice wise or?
Yes, absolutely. Slice by slice. Yep, and volume by volume. Yeah, so one slice fixes itself. So you would take, or you could do it for the entire volume if you'd like, I suppose, but why not do it slice by slice? Then you'd have to fight the temporal precision.
Yeah, well, I was asked about the slices, just from looking at a bunch of these brains and looking at so much of the respiration artifacts when we were figuring it out and sense, I had a strong sense that it was not constant throughout the brain, the amount of artifact that you'd get, the amount of the oscillation and the amount of the distortion, but I had never sat down and calculated it out. And I was really, to quantify if it is different in different parts of the brain. And at OHBM, I ran it last year. I ran into poster that I was just looking. Jonathan Power and Kendrick Kay were on it. They were the senior authors, but Hussein Bukhari was the first author. Stretch and Skews Induced in fMRI by Respiration was the title of their poster. So I have got real excited and chatted with them a lot. Whoops. Hopefully you didn't hear that. They were changing all the locks on our doors. I'm on campus.
Oh, good.
And yeah, anyway, it's just a metal thing falling, but
hopefully nobody got hurt.
Yeah. Oh, but this poster, I was real excited because they actually tested that of checking for the degree of the respiration, apparent motion in different slices across the time series with different, and trying to do quantifying the amount of nonlinear change.
Remember who the author was? It Alex Rauscher from UBC? You do remember the authors?
Was it who?
Rauscher, Alex Rauscher.
He wasn't on that one. No.
You remember the authors? Well,
no.
And I've only just, this is all, I skimmed through this paper last night so I could send it to Blaze so we could chat about it next week. But let me quickly show you this, just so this is how I understand it today. There's the phase image deconvolved. There's the local phase in part C. So that's the microscopic phase, which you would use for like SWI and things like that. And here is the spherical deconvolution of the field across the head in D. That's what you want to pull out. And then they fit a bunch of terms, just like they would sort of reverse engineer the shim.
Yeah.
This is pretty neat. So there's the sort of the punchline in blue. There's the ppm drift. There's the zeroth order term. So that's what you and I would use as the translational correction. So that's the pseudo-motion. There's a breath hold, right?
Yeah.
But you also have the first order. You have all of this information. You've pulled it all out in the spherical deconvolution. So whether you can use it or not for some other slightly finer precision fix would, I guess, be subject to research. But the information is there, pulled out.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. But it looks to me like, at least doing better would be good, right? So if we could just at least pull out this zeroth order term from the data itself and fix it without any other referencing, that'll be huge. I mean, now
though I'm still, it'd be very interesting to see how, because for such a fix to be useful, it would almost have to be perfect to be useful in some cases anyway. Oh, are you froze?
Oh no, I'm still going.
I can see you, but you're froze.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll carry on.
Okay.
Zoom issues. Everyone's used to them.
Yeah, true. But was saying is would have to be perfect is because, so I have quite a few data sets, this DMCC that we have a bit of it public, and we're collecting some similar now where they're doing verbal Stroop responsing. So they're talking in the scanner. And
Yeah.
I was really skeptical that it would kind of work at all, but it clearly does. We have all of the, proof of concept control analyses type things we've done. It's absolutely, I'm convinced we have signal, but we have, entrainment. Respiration is completely entrained to the task because they're talking. I mean, it's one word responses, but still they're talking, and just informally, I've a little bit more than where like just taking out parts of the movement time series, well, the y-axis as a proxy for the respiration. And, just taking, okay, I know that a task started here, here, and here on, in the DMCC data set, they're doing Sternberg, which has a very slow kind of a word list appears, pause, word list, pause, response, probe, slide. And some people, if you take like the onsets of the trials and just, pile up the translation, so kind of like EEG style, where you just take the little snippet aligned with the trial onsets to see, because if it's random, it'll just be a spaghetti mess. But if there's some sort of linking, you can see, well, I was just doing it with my fingers. And in our data set, just these kind of informal testing, some folks entrained to Sternberg. And I think it was because of the slow rhythm of it, and that they were trying to remember the words. So it's just, I mean, this is something that psychologists have studied, that people tend to entrain to rhythms. And there's even a bit of evidence that sometimes people that do the more in training tend to do better at the tasks for certain sorts of cognitive tasks. But you have this then very strong linking of the stimuli and the respiration. And I think that I've chatted with people about this because for my domain, it's a big issue, because it's like, so if we get every bit of respiration out, are we going to be, are we biasing our studies now because the respiration's in? Would we be biasing them more if we tried to take it out? How do we?
I might have good and bad news here, or a positive, an optimistic point, and then a rather pessimistic point. On the optimistic side, if I think, I mean, I need to reread this paper and discuss it with people who know more than I do, like Blaise.
Yeah.
But the way I understand it, it would just be just literally sliding things up and down, which would actually be potentially less hazardous than doing a 6-DoF rigid body realignment, where you really are just throwing everything, it's going to do all kinds of work. So to actually, the minimally pre-processed could be even less minimal, right? We could do even less. We could just do the translation and not even do, if you don't want to, don't even do a rigid body realignment. Or you could then, having fixed this somewhat at source, let's say the bulk of this problem goes away at source by the way you reconstruct the images, then you can still follow the rest of the standard procedures. You're just starting from a lower base, which is probably good. And because it's just a translation, the whole image, it's going to be very difficult to create any sort of false positives in local space when you're doing the whole image being moved around. And what I would use there as an example, as a comparator, is the way that we do Nyquist ghost correction, where you don't think about it, but we do the first 3 navigator echoes before you read out k-space line by line, and that's used to apply a 0th and first order correction to the imbalance in the positive and negative gradients. That's all invisible to you. So this could be done in that manner, and obviously you start with a nicer, cleaner data set. You're not trying to first of all figure out how to get rid of Nyquist ghosts. So I look at this almost like that. It's another sort of band-aid that should be sort of, I think, automatic. It's just not in current workflow.
Right.
So I think that's,
and that's, so that was okay. So is this paper you were talking about, you were bringing up previously, was that also something kind of at the reconstruction?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought it was after.
The problem, the difference being though, that we would need to collect the phase image as well as the magnitude.
to give
If you have
something
raw data, you're golden, because then you've got the complex data. You can always jump backwards and forwards in reconstruction as you like. I guess you could take the phase and the magnitude image and try to invert the process, but it would be a little messy. But with the raw data, you're golden. Anyone who's collecting raw data, they're in the catbird seat. But everybody else, we would need to shift to pushing the select the magnitude and phase option and just double the amount of data on disk. But we'll see. That's something for us to explore. This is brand new. This paper came out, I think, like 2 months ago.
Yeah,
But
so
the
who
pessimistic
knows
point.
if it has
So
some.
I think your bigger problem, I hate to tell you, is physiology. When you have that entrained breathing entrainment, you're going to get real bold changes, because you're going to get real changes in SiO2. You're going to get real changes in PCO2. That is going to generate a local variation that could easily give you false positives.
Oh yeah,
I have
no,
no solution for you there. You can record physio, global physio, but ultimately you're going to be looking at the local level. You're going to have to try and somehow orthogonalize the ongoing physiology from your task response bold.
yeah, it went kind of as a practical, well, I don't know if it's practical, but one way I've tried to kind of deal with it a little bit, or at least not have it, how do I want to put this? So I was referring to the Stroop, where I was saying I'm pretty dang confident that we do have some bold.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like the Stroop task is easy, because this is a color word Stroop. So, they're saying red, blue, whatever. And it's one where we have like, the different conditions. I mean, there's incongruent, word, same color, word, different color versions, but then there's also, some words, some colors are more biased than others. And so there's all these like subtle.
Oh, that's cool. So you do have some extra on top, some meta.
So if it was
That's
purely,
cool.
So when the person is talking, the entrainment is the same on all of these.
Right.
Because they're always,
okay, good.
They're always saying green, red, whatever. So when I can, so when we still see these subtle these differences relating to these kind of experimentally interesting effects, on top of that, I have more confidence that we're not purely seeing respiratory effects. I think it's harder in like the Sternberg, and this is all fMRI has this issue. I think a lot of people just aren't as aware of it. That people do tend to entrain to like music and movies and scanner noise and all sorts of stuff. And people, that's an individual difference thing of how much you entrain. But
well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm laughing because I had you just reminded me of something that happened in the lab yesterday when I got in. Let me see if I can very quickly show you. It doesn't matter. I'll find it. But I had a Stroop failure. We have a bunch of foam drawers, and there's pink foam, there's green foam, there's white foam, and I come in, and then in the pink foam drawer there's a whole bunch of green foam. And I'm like, guys, come on. I mean, we label for a reason.
yeah.
And I was like, yeah, Stroop failure. So,
yeah.
well,
No, but
so you're doing you're going to do a cognitive version of this sort of to try to sort of move some power away from the respiratory frequencies, which is good. I'm wondering if you could also do the converse. This might be more difficult, but Blaise and I were talking the other day about doing sort of surreptitious environmental changes where you would control, let's say, the oxygen level in the magnet just a tiny amount, by like plus minus 0.5%, and the CO2 level by a tiny amount, and as you could put in a damp sinusoid or whatever you like, and now you have some kind of extra information that's at least going into giving you a vascular signature.
Oh, interesting, kind of as a quantitative.
Yeah,
because I have thought about I guess it's your bias from the task design and because from the psychological side of things, with the folks that study entrainment, it's like, well, how can we not, can we pick stimuli that are less likely to trigger entrainment? With something like this Stroop, they're talking, it's guaranteed. But with something like the Sternberg, or if you're having people watch movies or something, some music is much more likely to trigger into that people are much more likely to entrain to some things than others. And if you could put enough, you could conceivably adjust the jitter between your trial intervals, because like in the Sternberg, for other reasons, for modeling reasons, it was a very fixed, slide 1, slide 2, probe slide was all fixed durations. But if you were really wanting to avoid that, putting a bit of jitter in, that kind of thing, kind of from the task design point of view, you might be able to minimize it, or at least make sure that that it wasn't going to swamp whatever your effects of interest, because people will do what they do. And
yeah, absolutely.
And this, breath holding is definitely something that people will do with difficult tasks.
For sure.
And if you're not tracking that.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping to get Molly Bright on soon too, because I want to talk to her about like more sort of holistic approaches, because it seems to me that that's the other part that we're missing here, is that, we start thinking from this interesting science, life support system, plumbing. Of course, not true. And then you wonder if with pupillometry, with any other sort of arousal measure you could get, would you then also be able to sort of orthogonalize some of the sort of at least bulk physiologic responses if the whole body is upregulating because the heart rate's going up, because minute ventilation is going up. If you're measuring these independent things, you can at least understand your data. And so when you see a big hotspot, you can at least ask the question, what's the explanatory power of these other things?
Yeah.
Could it be accidentally a consequence of these systemic shifts?
Yeah, or it's like if you're showing IAPS pictures, it's like, do people cringe when they see certain IAPS pictures or similar? Probably.
Right. Yeah,
probably. And that
exactly.
cringing sort of effect might be way bigger than the memory or whatever effect you're actually interested in.
Right. Yeah.
Especially for something like bold, as opposed to, because it's so exquisitely sensitive to.
Right. Well, that's this is fascinating. I mean, this is hard. It's just fMRI is hard. Turns out, it's easy. It's easy to do badly, really hard to do well.
Yeah, I've joked for years of black humor, but because I was mentioning psychophys back to my roots, because that's in my PhD work, I was analyzing psychophys data sets, old school psychophysiology, which is also partly why I'm all into more aware of entrainment, maybe, because we found it like crazy in those data sets with the music. And the entrainment from the tempo of the music was enough to completely explain everything, all of the findings. And so I've been kind of extra aware of it, but I've joked before that, fMRI is just a much more expensive way of doing psychophys. That sometimes I really, that's a bit of a black humor thing, but sometimes I'm like, are we really, how much more are we gaining in some of these? I mean, I'm quite convinced that we have, I can tell if somebody's, wiggling their right hand versus their left hand, and these kinds of things are incredibly robust. But when you're starting to talk more subtle psychological motivation, reward, individual differences in emotional regulation and cognitive control, which some of the folks are, event boundary sensing, some of these higher order, very higher order cognitive concepts. Some days I'm more convinced than others that we can really get at it cleanly and robustly. But
well, cleanly and robustly, those may be good goals, but we just have to do as well as
there isn't a little bit of the brain that does motivation.
or language, or
it's not like wiggling your finger, when there is a bit of the brain that pretty much does that.
Well, at least the last part in the chain.
Exactly.
Some of the pre-processing and some of the final execution. But who's to say what else is going on in terms of motivation? I always think about that whenever I do, because I do a cartoon thing for kids, when we have school visits, we do left hand versus right hand finger tapping, because it's bulletproof, right?
Yeah, yep.
And you can take money off them or not. Just joking. Their lunch money. You can talk about the brain and how is the brain wired? Why would it be you started with left hand, but then why is the right motor cortex
Right.
left? There's corpus callosum. You can look at the cerebellum, and there's obviously no mirroring. So there's lots to do there. But yeah, it's always, I always wonder whenever I ask anybody to go in. Well, first of all, I try and do it blinded, but then when they come out, you have them tell you which hand they started with after you've got the data up on the screen, so you can't con it. But then you also can make a lot of distinction. People who are very heavily right versus left-handed, you often see a big difference in the size of M1. And then if they are guitarists or musicians, pianists, they're not. I'm doing this.
It's like overtrained, and
right. And I have to count it for they're playing, Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
So at that point, what else is going on in their brain, right?
Yep.
So even that simple task could be confounded depending on who you pick. Anyway, well, what else, kids? What else? What else are you? What else is on your mind?
I don't know. No, lately I've been getting into this Todd, because I'm on soft money, so it's doing this project, that project, but with Todd Braver, the PI but we have this large Muri grant now that's through the Office of Naval Research, which is I was like, why would they want to fund us? But it's related to the cognitive control tasks. And we're collaborating with a bunch of folks, some of whom do, my shorthand is very heavy duty modeling of, reaction times, error rates, that kind of stuff. And others who do, trying to make like the AXCPT task with, where or Stroop, where you're looking at, the AXCPT, if it's A and then an X, you push a button. If it's A and Y, you push a different button. It's insanely dull, in my opinion.
But hard, stressful, I would imagine.
And they're trying to make kind of less arbitrary or less esoteric, kind of the gamified interfaces and stuff. But anyway, this data, but we have collaborators at Australia, East Coast, West Coast of the States. It's a bunch of different people. And so trying to get everybody to be like, okay, our data is going to live in bids. It's living on these servers and going through, and it's been fun.
Yeah, multi-center trials. That's also on my list of things to talk about, because exercising compromise and diplomacy.
But no, it's been actually, the folks have been, it's kind of funny that the more experience the people have with kind of their hands on the data, even if because folks that are from the behavioral world or whatever don't necessarily have heard of bids, because why would they? Because it started with imaging. But there are, when I explain how, well, see, we always have these are the top level directories. This is how we name stuff. The participant demographics are always in a file called this. People start getting really excited. One person was like, I wish we would have known about this when I was doing my dissertation work, because I was, he had been trying to figure out how to store the data. And that's actually, if you're, trying to come up with a system from scratch, is, it's like, so here it's arbitrary, but at least it's defined. And I'm really,
and this is MRI data, other data plus MRI data, behavioral data plus
it's
MRI.
going to be a lot of behavioral, some psychophys. This project only got started a few months ago, and we're still gearing up, but some MTurk behavioral data sets I've been working
MRI
with
to sort of look and see where
there will be a fair bit of MRI, EEG, on versions of, we're hoping to do a lot of where the same participants will come in and do, 15 EEG sessions on different tasks, 15 fMRI, all intermixed, some behavioral sessions, physio sessions eventually, to kind of get all of the modalities and on different versions of the same task. So like queued task switching, but not always letter number. Sometimes square or circle or whatever the heck. Yeah.
Oh, well, that might be an interesting opportunity for some fMRI QC development too, because now suddenly you've got very many, big decent sized N for M subjects.
That's what
Ask an
we're
awful lot of good
hoping.
questions
Yeah,
about
it's a
interns.
multi-site, but it's kind of different in that it's not people at all these different sites doing the same study.
Right.
It's that people here need to have access to the data. People here are running studies, it's.
And is there a longitudinal component in like terms of their practice? Are they trying to get better at some task while they come back to do these 15 sessions, or is it just more of a you need 15 sessions to evaluate all these different domains?
At this point, this is one of those where I'd have to defer to some of my collaborators on what exactly some of the hypotheses are. I'm honestly not sure. I know that to get the longitudinal part is, I know, a big part, but what exactly, I'm honestly not sure.
Okay,
well,
let's tuck that information away for future reference, because if we need a good set of data for QC purposes, where you've got lots of repeats on a larger number of more diverse subjects, that could be really important, because it's not common, right? I mean, I think some longitudinal studies, I think UK Biobank has brought back some people for a second scan and they want to do another one, but it'll be relatively distant, which means that there'll be big biological changes.
Yeah, well, and to do a sales pitch, but I keep mentioning this DMCC data set, dual mechanisms of cognitive control. But that's the one that we released, 55 people baseline session only are in Open Neuro now. And I did a scientific data paper about that 55 people, but we're not in active data collection for that anymore. But they didn't come.
How many repeats for the individual?
So at least 3 so one wave made up 3 sessions on different days where they were doing slightly very proactive, reactive baseline versions of the tasks.
Right.
But we have, I'm trying to remember the exact N, 80, 75, 80 or so that came back for a second wave of scanning, and a handful that came back for a third wave of scanning. Cool. So some of these people, and some of them were also in the HCP data set. So we have definitely not plumbed the depths of all of that data at all. And, but I know that Todd will enter, he is very definitely, we entertain, requests for collaborations. And we have a few folks, actually somebody out at Brown who's involved with the MURI. She's starting to look at some of the cerebellar activity in DMCC. And she was like, oh, what kind of QC did you do on the cerebellar? I was like, 0.
Was this the 3 millimeter voxels, 3 millimeter MB4?
No, this one was, that's this new study, a new study. The DMCC was 2.4 isotropic, but also MB4.
MB4, and you've got full cerebellar coverage on all your
She
subjects?
said that it's looking quite good, actually.
Okay. Somebody told me once that the cerebellum was actually part of the brain.
I know, it's like weird, huh?
I cut it off. Right.
Yeah, when she was asking about it, I was like, because she's like, oh, do you have a list of, which participants have good cerebellar coverage and stuff? And I was like, absolutely not. Yeah. We did not, just Wow. But the DMCC data set, I think there's even twins in the mix. So
that's neat.
And some of the twin pairs and I can pick out twin pairs in some cases from the movement parameters, which also adds some fun.
Wow, because they're so similar, because they're such similar body sizes, etc. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, and that was the data set you used for this QC competition, right? Yeah. No.
Not so the OpenQC project, that was all data that Paul found from Open Neuro repository and another one, I believe.
Okay. Because of course, because that was the single band.
That too.
The MCC is multi-band. Yeah, golly, yeah.
Yeah, I adopted some of the parameters. So it kind of, why I was pausing is that I purposely used some of the same thresholds and procedures as we did for the DMCC for the OpenQC project for demo purposes, and especially the to look at the participant behavior, and I was surprised by this is kind of shifting gears, but the OpenQC project where they for the not everybody looked at the task data set part of it. Some folks just did the resting state, and I only did the task. But I mapped out the participant responses, and I was the only one that did that. And one of the participants only responded to like most of the participants were basically perfect, or like one error across the run and whatever the heck they were doing. We didn't really know what, but we had accuracy or not on the responses, and most people were pretty much perfect. But then we had one person who like responded to the first 8 or 9 trials and then stopped responding. So I marked them as somebody that I would drop.
Fell asleep.
Probably. In our studies, that's usually what happens, because it's literally in the informed consent that you may find these tasks boring. It's literally in the informed consent, because yeah. But anyway, yeah, I guess I talked about that in the OpenQC thing a bit, but things like looking at the participant response patterns can be incredibly useful. Because if you're looking for task activity and the person was sleeping, or if some of them, we actually use these little plots, it's built into our after the participant leaves QC reports of, and some of them, depending on the sort of task, it will even show like which response button were they using. Because it's like if they always respond with the left button, we probably, they are not doing the task in the way that we want them to be. We do not want to be including their data. And I mean, obviously every task, it's different for what the key, but when I work with folks, I try to tell them, what is it that the participants, is there anything kind of that the participants have to be doing for their data to be useful? And how can you tell, or is there some sort of behavior that if they're doing it, it just, all your hypotheses break, and we need to test for those conditions as early as possible.
That sounds like a really good data set to use for a next OpenQC. Multiband OpenQC for multiband. That sounds cool, man. That's really
it would be cool. And it'd be, I'm sure that, I mean, some folks were looking at such more detail than I was at the anatomicals and the alignments, and some of that we do most everything now with parcel level.
Yeah.
Schaefer parcels, as opposed to the voxel or vertex level.
Yeah.
And partly it is because of all of this kind of anatomical squish. I'm like, I just am not confident that it really makes sense in these sorts of data sets to try to look at stuff at the sub-millimeter, individual voxel level. I just don't think we have the resolution and the alignment across people. So going to the kind of, we're going to worry about parcels, groups of it seems to help a bit with the, shifting gears again, but it kind of ties in with QC, because if you're going to be trying to do, layer QC and, layer fMRI and trying to really look at mapping out visual fields and things, that's a completely different critter than if you're, trying to do proactive versus reactive cognitive control in multiple tasks over time. They're very different sorts of questions and levels of interest. But
yeah, and I mean that's kind of why I'm interested in fMRI QC, not just because it's nice to find when people have broken things, but to me it's part of the feedback. How can I improve the stuff on the front end if I don't know what's going wrong on the back end?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And it's going to be a lot of subtleties, things like button presses, people not responding at stuff that I don't think about. Right? I think about Nyquist ghosts and coils not connecting. The sort of the physics of the thing and the engineering, but you then somebody has to be thinking about the biology too, the physiology, the cognitive part, and all of the ways that can break, and then feed that information back into designing a more robust experiment, and again and iterating on the QC so that you check for those things to make sure that you got what you wanted. Forward.
Well, and that's, I think, well, I'm biased, of course, as scientific staff as opposed to faculty, but I really think that you need some of each to do
For sure.
some of these correctly, because
Yep.
trying to have all the ways that I think about what can go wrong, but then you have to have somebody thinking about the cognitive load, then all of this, that's a whole different level of how do we encourage the sort of cognitive control that we're interested in, and and that's a huge topic, and I kind of respect it, but I can't, it's not room in my head to fit all of that, plus everything else, and then the MR physics side of it.
Yeah, no, I think this is why it has to be sort of based around working groups, and I think OHPM is probably the only organization set to bridge those, to span those gaps, because MRI, ISMRM is too physics oriented.
I went to ISMRM a couple years ago, actually talking QC. And this is where my really badness at Oscar Esteban and some organized a session.
Okay.
And I talked about kind of task things and this kind of idea of, as the data is collected, you go through a step of QC immediately, and positive controls for the button pushing. That's kind of my shorthand for.
Was it in the fMRI study group? Do you remember?
No, we weren't a study group at ISMRM. It was a workshop session.
Okay, because there is a study group. I could imagine. I haven't been to it for a while, but I can imagine it's physics for physicists. So they're looking for.
Well, there were a lot of clinicians there.
Oh, okay.
It was much heavier on the clinician side.
Oh, okay.
And it was a lot of kind of, this is my outsider impression, but it was kind of how can we make our pictures of tumors or hearts or whatever prettier?
Oh, so more clinical QC, even not fMRI QC.
Which was a very different sort of, I'm not so, pretty doesn't exactly, it's like, how is the signal cleaner? Is movement less of a problem? Is, these sorts of things.
Quite different.
And they were really, can we see the difference between this tissue type and that tissue type better? Well, I mean, it's a thing. It's just not my thing.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's not your motivation. Well, let's see what happens with OHPM. I mean, I don't go to that, and I haven't been to that for a while either. So, but hopefully someone will champion this. There's enough people who have a real bona fide interest in it to.
Yeah.
It's obviously crucially important.
Yeah, there's unfortunately a lot of very probably unusable data sets out there. And I mean, I think that's, QC is part of the replicability crisis and all of that too, of you can't.
That, to me, that's the optimistic take on this, is like, the more you look at it and poke at it, the more you understand, the more you can feed it back, the better you could do next time. Right? Why would you just simply want to know, was the coil on or not? That's great. That's a first level question. Right. But
yeah.
You stop thinking there and you've missed the point.
Yeah. Or you'll be trying to read in a level of detail. I encourage folks to look at the data in at least sometimes in the resolution that you collected it. And it's like, don't fool yourself with thinking that you have more than you do. You can make the images prettier, but should you trust the numbers that come out of those analyses? Sometimes, yes, but
how do you do that with large N studies? I know there's a whole big. I know we went from small N, batch. What they call it, small batch. What's the term? The artisanal data. To,
or the
of tens of thousands. It's Ben-Hur cast of thousands, right?
Yeah.
Now it's like there's maybe we've possibly also for resource reasons, because boy does that get expensive. But coming back now to artisanal, that's again the new flavor. But there's definitely a tension in people who say got to have large N, got to normalize, and then people will say no, N of 1 and do the shit out of it. So yeah, but the resources are if the amount of data that you're looking at, whether it's N of 1 and hours or hundreds of hours of data, or an N of thousands, and it's just out, you can't look at all of that. There aren't enough years in life. You need some sort of automation.
Yeah, though so how I view that is that some of these studies with this DMCC, where, as I said, we more than I'm not I don't remember the ends off the top of my head, but hundreds of people, each of whom had at least six, with 3 sessions, well, 100 or so had the 6 sessions of fMRI data. That's a lot of images, but we didn't collect them all at once. It was, one session pretty much every day. And
so you wanted to sort of go through it, do it.
that's why kind of
workflow.
emphasizing the having, that a programmer, somebody that's more, knowledgeable and,
It does awfully sound like washing up after you've cooked a good meal, though, doesn't it?
a
Like,
little bit,
I
but
don't want to have to go wash up now.
no, but I kind of view it as, that you don't collect the data and walk away. You have to, if it's a task data, do you have the E prime output or whatever the heck? Do you have the images? Did they make it to the repository like they're supposed to? Did they make it then? But then also with these we have scripts that are kind of semi-automated so that for these longer projects where we have full-time people kind of in between their bachelor's and grad school, if they're not sure if they want to go to grad school or not, or whatever, they'll come to the lab for a year or so and work full-time doing this. And, so some of them have a fair bit of experience with imaging, others of them absolutely none. And some of them are more savvy with programming things than others and more interest than others. So we have kind of this semi-automated sets of PDF reports and stuff, but to kind of try to span that because I've had good luck with, telling folks, to working with, this array of people and newcomers to, do you see brains? On these images, it should look like, but the brain should be centered. It should fill up, so we have some artifacts like the brain look, so I'll get like messages, Joe, it looks like it's melting, and like flag me on a participant where the normalization just utterly failed, the realignment and stuff. And it did look like it was melting. It was a very accurate description where in the frame.
What was the problem?
That was straight pre-processing. I think in that one, we just reran fMRI prep and everything was fine. I don't even remember exactly. I just remember
zapped your computer momentarily.
Well, there are gremlins. And when you're dealing with
neutrinos, apparently. Yeah.
When you're dealing with, transferring terabytes of data from this computer to that computer, stuff does just sometimes if you just delete it all and rerun it, it does work the second time around, but you have to have human eyeballs on it. So that's how we've tried to square that circle of these big data sets, is to kind of have a minimal set of checks that people can do without too much training and experience to then send to more experienced folks if anything seems odd. And that doesn't solve everything, of course, because then you still need, when it's time to analyze groups and things to look at. But I think at the point, very close to data collection, if you're omitting that step, badness can ensue.
I mean, that I think is the most important thing for me anyway, in looking at QC, is it's not a chore. It's a part of the process that you should be circumspect about. You will learn things, and if you're paying attention, maybe you'll come up with better ways to do something in the future, rather than just treating it like the washing up, or that you've got to just brain dead thing that you must do. It's not that you treat it as outside of the science. I think if you bring it back into being a part of your science, you have opportunities.
And that it's not cheating to look at the images to see if they have brains.
No, definitely not. No.
And
there's no way you're going to be able to get I think even a tiny finger on a scale by just looking at these data, in just verifying that things are okay.
And some of my favorite things are button pressing, because the folks I work with, people are doing tasks and they're responding to tasks pretty much always with pushing buttons. So it's like, run a GLM or whatever with button presses as your sole event of interest, not the trial types, nothing, just can you see motor when you, in your these button pressing GLMs? And if you can't, something is not right.
Flag, investigate,
and that, to me, my mind, that's why I was calling that but the kind of the positive control analysis, because that's not peeking at the data. It's not, has nothing to do with the experimental hypotheses. And you don't even have to know the hypotheses to do that, to do those sorts of analyses.
Is this a common, I haven't heard this before. Do you think this is a common thing? People are really afraid now of
absolutely
dipping, and we've scared a whole generation of people into.
I've had multiple folks that I've had to argue with about this very extensively, of trying to make the distinction between, do we have fMRI? Do we have, EKG? Do we have, and just kind of saying skin conductance should look like this, respiration, and like this button pushing, or if there's something on the screen, then, or versus not, a comparison of that, you should be able to have, massive visual activity. If you're just doing something on the screen, not on the screen type of GLMs. But I've had to argue pretty forcefully sometimes and repeatedly to get folks to agree that it's acceptable.
Wow.
To do that level of.
Well, I guess the old dead salmon got used to beat people. My goodness.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, I can see that you have to understand kind of enough of the entire process to be like, this, if my control analysis is who has the Stroop effect, that is peaking. If it's, can I see that they're, the little bit of motor comes on when they're talking, that is not peaking.
No.
And
do you remember in I don't know what year it was, probably about 2014, maybe a little later, probably maybe around the time you and I were doing stuff. I remember Jonathan Power opened one of his papers with basically a mea culpa, and he was just like, all the shit I thought I understood, all this stuff, all my favorite results are junk.
Yeah.
It's all respiratory, it's all CO2, and it's, and that's like, that's a powerful lesson for people.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to, who he was working with here, the lab head, because it'll come to me in a minute. I'm not good at names. He's mostly retired now.
Avi Snyder?
No.
Marcus Reichel?
No. No, it'll come to me, but because Powers was a grad student, I believe, or maybe a
PhD, right? He was psychiatry, but the reading that, when you read it, he sounded disappointed in himself that he got sort of beguiled, but the point is that he was circumspect enough to ask it, why does this not make sense, and now go figure it out, right? Which, to me that's a version of QC. Okay, it's a very, very macro level, right? But it's still QC. He asked those tough questions. Maybe he could have figured it out earlier if he'd been, but I doubt it. Even the best people make mistakes.
I was gonna say, an awful lot of people did not. There were a lot. It's not like it was something that only that lab was working on.
No, right, no.
And
he called it the whole field. I mean, we're talking as late as 2014, 15, 16.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of papers.
CO2, right. So people had completely missed the respiratory effects, especially in things like, psychiatric conditions where you have other confounds, smoking and various other things. And a lot of this stuff was just invisible to people. But yeah, I think that's I think that's an optimistic lesson personally, because obviously he made he certainly got a good publication record out of it. I mean, nobody faulted him for making the mistakes. People lauded him for coming out.
Well, and I mean, that's the kind of, there's a very big difference between fraud or carelessness and nobody knew this was a thing.
Right.
And then
honest mistake. Yeah.
It's a very different phenomenon.
Yeah.
Especially at that level where it's, nobody really knew it was
Right.
You know, it took a fair bit of hunting to figure out the influence
Right.
on these, you
Right.
know, it's,
Right.
yeah.
I think we need to probably pick up there again. We should go back there and don't start from where we are. Maybe backtrack a little bit and try and understand some of these other things which we've probably baked into some of our processes inadvertently.
Yeah, well, I've told some of the folks I work with when it's like, well, why do we run the buttons GLMs? You know, we have GLMs that are called buttons and others that are called ons, which is kind of shorthand for all trials. So it's like we set a regressor at the onset of every single trial, regardless of type.
Right.
Just against, so it's against baseline. And it's like, well, if you see, you know, a motivation effect that's 10 times stronger than the button pressing effect, I'm not going to believe it. You know, it's like, given, you know, it's like,
yeah.
I also try to explain as it's kind of like trying to give us some rulers or a way of a framework for interpreting, because
I was taught as a chemist, you know, they always said, work the numbers out, then work the units out separately using the same methodology. If the units don't make sense, you've screwed up.
Yeah.
If the number makes sense. You've got something that's, you know, you're doing your intergalactic physics and you've got something that's in microns, probably not the correct order.
Yeah. And yeah, but yeah, it's really frustrating, this hesitancy in some groups to adopt the kind of look at the data as you go along approach is very, very frustrating, in my opinion. Or like, oh, we can't have the people, I like to have the people that collect the data do this initial step with help. Sure. I mean, you know, they don't come up with the processing scripts on their own. I and others, you'll get those ready.
Yeah, I think at some point all you can do is lead by example, right? You can't fix other labs, other people's labs, other universities.
Absolutely, but yeah.
So your people are better trained, they come out better, and then they can lead by example. I mean, look at you mentioned COBIDAS. You know, we're still reporting shitty parameters.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We know exactly what to do, but we still don't do a very good job of it.
Yeah, I guess I like to have the people that are acquiring the data, you know, running the participants, running the scanner, you know, because sometimes those people can be completely different people than the people that are pre-processing. And to looking at it, that, you know, so it's like the people that are acquiring it don't have any sense really of, they're like, well, it goes to this person, and then they do something with it, and it's like this magic black box. And I like, one of the reasons I push, now I'm getting on all my hobby horses, but that I've tried to encourage the kind of ordering where you have the people who are acquiring the data do the initial processing right away, is that then they'll be like, oh, this one, you know, well, that those two dark runs, or, you know, oh, if the person is moving a lot, the images look like this. If they're still, the images look like that. You know, that
your natural handover, your handshake. So you have, you know, your button press GLM, right? So the person that receives the data, so the person who collected the data ran button press GLM, verified, sanity check, good, pass it on. The next person picks that up and says, right, okay, sanity check says good. This should be right. So let me start looking at it from this perspective, what was done before, rather than blindly just starting my part of the procedure.
Yeah, exactly. And that is kind of my model, that then we have like this minimal set of standard analyses that are run. I mean, and I'm talking for these bigger multi-year, multi-RA type projects. Not, you know, a grad student running 10 or something, but for the big projects, then we have this kind of standard set of analyses and QC images and other things that I and others kind of in charge of the project at the high level have designed. But then if somebody is coming in and wants, you know, then there's lots of folks that want to test various cognitive or whatever hypotheses about the data set. They don't have to start from, they're not starting from scratch.
No, that makes
but yet and it's a bit of an easier step, I think, because they do have the kind of standard things to look at and start with.
Yeah,
even though they're
not a little bit of comfort that they're not going to just run slam into some, insurmountable problem because someone that
Well, and also to have demos of, because not every, how do you get numbers out of a Nifty? And some of this, logistics stuff that can be a big, I don't want every dang new lab member to be spending months trying to figure out how to call app need.
Quite. Yeah.
So it's
yeah.
good from that.
Once you have the same conversation the third time with somebody, it's time to make a video, produce a document, do something.
Well, and that's how a lot of the blog posts came about.
Yeah, no, totally, exactly that same, absolutely same. Like, okay, there's a big pothole in the road over here, and you're going to drive down the same road I'm driving. I'm gonna just show you where the pothole is. Please don't.
Yeah, and we have a new lab member who needs to learn connect on Workbench. So it's like, okay, start with my tutorial. And he's like, well, it's version 1.5 now, and your tutorial's for 1.4.2. And I was like, well, try it.
Yeah.
If there's anything that doesn't match, let me know. And then if it's close enough, and I don't have to update it, but if it's not close.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, that's how a lot of that stuff happens.
Cool. All right. Well, listen, we've got an hour and a half, I think. Anything else? Any final thoughts before I hit the old pause button? And
I think I've hit all my favorite topics at the moment.
do more QC people. That's the public information, public service, right?
Well, and to not be afraid to look at the data.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I did know. I remember years ago laughing at someone who said, "Look at the data." I'm like, what else would you do? Like, isn't that patently obvious? But evidently, no, it's not. In fMRI, no, it's not.
It's not remotely common. Some people, and I'm, some groups that I'm peripherally involved with, they have kind of the pre-processing person, the resting state person. So you just say to the resting state person, I need connectivity matrices on this data set, and they come. And they, and then if I'm chatting with one of the person who's analyzing the connectivity matrices, they, and I'm like, oh, did you do X, this bit of how, did you do XCPD or whatever? How did you do the regressors and which exact regressor? They have absolutely no idea. And that I do not think is a good strategy, but it's a common one, at least in folks that I run into. And some of those people are the ones that, how the data gets, it's just, they just don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, which is
well, okay. Let's hope that we can see some slow behavioral improvements in the field.
Yeah.
This pause button.